There was no corrosion anywhere, no decay of any kind. The machine guns lying on the deck were oiled and ready to fire, along with the bright copper casings of ammunition. They climbed up to the cockpit where the pilot and co-pilot had commanded the plane. It was empty too. Maybe they had all gotten out, Macaulay thought. But where could they have gone? Macaulay eased himself into the pilot's seat. An open pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes rested on the edge of the console by the throttle controls. The instrument gauges looked like they were waiting to be turned on. It struck him that the restoration team back in Lubbock wouldn't have much work to do on this plane. He and Hancock headed aft past the top turret machine gun to the bomb bay compartment. Aside from the scrape of their ice cleats on the steel deck, it was as silent as a tomb. The bomb bay was crammed with unmarked wooden crates still strapped into position with thick cordage. Inside were President Roosevelt's Christmas presents to the European elite. Hancock pointed to another stack at the rear of the compartment. Each crate was labeled Old Forester Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. One of them had been cracked open. The radio compartment was next, and it was as empty as the others. The aircraft's BC-348 radio receiver was mounted to the tabletop. A Dick Tracy comic book sat on top of it. The BC-375 transmitter on the opposite bulkhead was turned to the on position. In the waist gunner's compartment, they found the answer to the riddle. The crew hadn't gotten out after all. 9 of them lay sprawled out in the compartment, which had clearly been organized as a last redoubt against the agonizing cold. The men had sealed the hatches of the waist guns and gathered all their clothing and blankets together to stay warm. Most were wearing their sheepskin-lined flying suits with lined bunny boots. They had all frozen to death. Hancock directed the lights at their faces one by one, and Macaulay recorded them on his video camera. Their faces reflected a mixture of sadness, resignation, perplexity, and despair. "Not the worst way to go, Steve. Buried alive wouldn't be my choice." Dick Slezak, the turret gunner, looked impossibly young for a man who would now be approaching 90 if he had survived the war. He would always be 18. "Ted Morgan is missing," said Macaulay after they examined the 9 bodies. Morgan was the pilot who had made the miraculous landing in the middle of the blizzard. He had been 23 years old and hailed from Macaulay's hometown of Lexington, Virginia. Shortly after Pearl Harbor, Morgan had married an Army nurse named Cherie Carter. A year later, she had given birth to a baby girl. Cherie was still alive, now a 90-year-old grandmother. She had remarried 7 years after Ted had disappeared. They found him in the tail gunner's compartment. He was lying on his back and staring up toward the surface of the ice cap, as if visually attempting to escape from their tomb. Macaulay remembered his face from Morgan's personnel file. It had reminded Macaulay of himself, lean and square-jawed with a hint of cockiness, a hot flyer who had wanted to be a fighter pilot and had instead been assigned to bombers. The cockiness was gone now. The opened bottle of Old Forester stood next to him on the floor of the compartment. 3 inches remained in the bottom. Near his outstretched hand was a leather-bound diary. Macaulay unzipped it and thumbed through the last few pages. Morgan had survived almost 2 weeks. He had been the last to die. 28 December 42. Did a good job landing the plane in snow and darkness. Everyone safe. Radio not working, but Jeff hopes to fix it soon and send out our approximate position. Can't be more than 10 miles from the coast. 5 January 43. Snow hasn't stopped since we landed. Slezak dug his way up from the waist door and broke through the snow layer about 8 feet above the top turret. Men now take turns going up with a flare gun. If one hears an airplane, he is to shoot off a flare. Brutal up there. No one can stay outside more than 30 minutes. 8 January 43.